The Arcanist is looking great for PvE DPS in update 44, so this video will be showing a few of my favorite setups. I got 120k Parse using a really easy loadout with only 6 active abilities and an ultimate, so I'll go through all the details of that setup, and then a big shout out and thanks to Fractal and Rye for letting me share their meta setup parses. Pretty similar overall, just slightly different configuration with a couple of additional skills. I'll have their videos linked down below, make sure to check those out. Alright, starting first with the attributes, we'll be going 64 points into stamina. For the race, Dark Elf is the best for damage all around, but Khajiit is pretty much tied if you aren't at the crit damage cap of 125%. I like Khajiit a lot for less organized stuff, and my Arcanist on the live servers is a Khajiit. Orc is also really close to Dark Elf, only 1,000 less stamina, all the other stats are equal for damage, so you really won't be able to tell a difference there. And then High Elf is also a good option, but really any race can do fine. For the Mundus Stone, we'll be going with the Thief for the extra crit chance. For our food, the one I most commonly use is max health and stamina food, but for a dummy parse, or if you're confident with the lower health pool, you can use the green food that just gives extra max stam. It's only about 1% more damage, maybe even a little less than that, but for a scenario where you're not worried about the health, you might as well. Sugar Skulls can also be alright too if you need a little more magicka to work with. I use these sometimes if I'm running potions that don't have that magicka return on them. Gives me a little bit bigger magicka pool to play with. Those are the main ones that I'm using, but for all of the options and the reasons why you might use them, I have them listed under the Build Basics section on my website at skinnycheeks.gg. For the potions, I usually do the Try Restoration potions, often in the form of the free daily login reward versions, but if I'm getting a little more sweaty, I'll often use the Heroism potions. These are pretty expensive, but the extra ult is really nice. We do have some other options for minor heroism now, which I'll talk about in the skill section later, so you might not need to run these. And then another option I like to run are the physical and spell resist potions. These do make sustain tough. They don't have any magicka or stamina return on them, but in places like the Infinite Archive where you can get really awesome sustain buffs, or if you run a food choice that gives you more sustain, these are definitely doable and they make you really tanky. 5280 more armor is the equivalent of about 8% less damage taken. For the champion points, Thaumaturge and Biting Aura are the two I nearly always have slotted. For the last two, usually I'll have Wrathful Strikes, and then if I need more crit damage, Fighting Finesse. If I need a lot more crit damage, I'll run Backstabber and Fighting Finesse in these last two spots. But remember, there is a cap of 125% for crit damage, so in organized group play, you shouldn't need both of these. And then finally, if Off Balance is present and I'm already good on crit, then I'll run the Exploiter node here. This is really strong for short burst, and even just kept up on cooldown for a longer encounter, it's still a really nice average damage boost. This is the common setup to use on the trial dummy since crit damage is taken care of and Off Balance is provided. Alright, let's go through the skills. So the first setup here will be the easier setup that I got 120k DPS with. So I'll go through the exact skills that I used and also talk about some alternatives. So we'll start off with the back bar. First is the brand new skill Banner Bearer. This is a toggled skill, and once it's on, you don't have to press anything for it again unless you die or you go to a new instance, then you'll need to turn it on again. We are going with the fiery option here for the focus, which will boost dot damage. The AoE damage option is pretty solid too, but the dot seems a little bit better for most single target setups. Both will boost your beam though, and that is the main thing we're worried about. For most content, since you can't swap on the fly, it might be best to just run the AoE one since that's best for trash and pretty close to even for bosses. The magical one is also in the same range as those. Remember, magical covers flame, frost, shock, and magic damage. So depending on what other classes are in the comp with you, that may determine which one of these you want to go with. For the dummy parse, I was using fiery. For the signature, we want to go with the class mastery. This one is pretty underwhelming on most scribing skills for DPS, but it works really well here since it just passively gives us crux every 5 seconds without having to hit anything. For the affix, this one is really up to you. There are a few good options here. One thing to keep in mind is that the minor affixes will apply to your whole group, and the majors will only apply to you. Minor Heroism is probably my top recommendation here, as you don't need to use those expensive heroism potions. Major Savagery and Prophecy is also nice, but in this particular setup, we are getting those through another skill. But if you need the buff for your setup, go for it. I've heard some suggest minor berserk here to help with the uptimes on that, but I've also heard that it's bugged and can stop you from receiving any minor berserk at all if there are other sources also going, so I'd stay away from that one for now. But really, the affix is up to you. Whatever you want more for your build, you have some wiggle room here. Next up, we have Quick Cloak. This is a nice 30-second dot. It gives us a boost of speed, and it keeps up our dagger enchantments. This also triggers the back bar set, which we're using, which I'll go over later in the gear section. Next is Inspired Scholarship. This is another 30-second skill that adds damage to our class abilities every 3 seconds. It also passively gives you Major Brutality and Sorcery when slotted, which is super convenient, and then it will generate Crux when it deals damage if you don't already have any Crux. So Quick Cloak and Inspired Scholarship are both 30-second skills, which makes this a lot easier for those that don't like bar swapping as much. And then finally, we have a couple of flex spots. These can be used for either offense or defense, depending on your goals. For the 120k parse I slotted Fulminating Rune and Camo Hunter. Fulminating Rune is a pretty decent dot on its own, but it also is really nice to give your teammates synergies that do a lot of damage. And then Camo Hunter is just here for the passive buff. For some content, if you are taking consistent damage, Cruxweaver Armor is going to be really good too. Not only does it give some nice defensive buffs on a long 30-second timer, but it generates Crux when you take damage up to once every 5 seconds. So this can be really nuts with the banner also building Crux, as you'll often have times when you'll finish beaming and you'll already be full on Crux again, and you just immediately beam more. So I highly recommend giving this skill a shot, but all of these options here could be useful. For our ultimate, we have either the Languid Eye or Tide King's Gaze morph. Both are very strong. Languid is a tiny bit better if you are with an organized group and you know the stack positions really well. Tide King's Gaze is my preferred for more pug type stuff where I'm not sure if stuff will move around because this one will follow the target. You will see Languid more for organized groups though. Personally, I still usually just run Tide King because it's really close to the same outside of sweaty scenarios, and I'm just too lazy to swap it back and forth, but really up to you here. Languid is the go-to for dummy parsing. For the front bar, we have Banner again, and then we have Barbed Trap. This is also a flex spot, but Barbed Trap is really nice single target damage between the dot and the hemorrhaging that it triggers, and you get a passive 3% weapon and spell damage just for having it slotted on the bar too, so it's hard to beat for single target damage, but feel free to drop this for another skill you might need. It isn't crucial to the build working. Next is Cephaliarch's Flail. This has seen some nerfs over the last year, but it is still a really nice skill to build Crux with, and it will keep that ink debuff applied to your target, which gives a 5% damage taken debuff. I did mess around a bit with swapping morphs here, but Flail seems like it's still the easier option to manage. Then next we have the key skill that all of this is centered around, Fate Carver. Both morphs are really strong here. Exhausting lasts for 1 second longer when you cast it at 3 Crux, and therefore deals a little more damage overall, but Pragmatic is super close behind and offers a really nice shield and a cheaper cost. Personally, I use Pragmatic more often in content than I do Exhausting, but depending on your goals, both of these are great. For trial dummy testing, most people use Exhausting. And then we have Camo Hunter. This is a flex on the back bar, but really important to have on the front bar for this setup, as the Major Savagery and Prophecy for the extra crit chance, plus the Minor Berserk from attacking an enemy from behind are both really nice. And like Barbed Trap, since it's a Fighter's Guild skill, you get 3% weapon and spell damage just for slotting it. You don't need to cast this skill at all. It does all of its work passively. And then finally for the front bar ultimate, we have Flawless Dawnbreaker. We aren't usually casting this one. It's just there for the passive boosts from the Fighter's Guild skill line. However, sometimes I will cast it towards the end of a fight if I know I won't have enough ultimate to get to another Languid Eye. Depends if I want my ult up for the next trash pack after that boss though. So there are also scenarios where you'll switch your ultimates and you will front bar Languid Eye. It gives you a little bit more penetration from the passives at the cost of the Fighter's Guild passives, and it also makes it a little easier to control the ultimate and to cast quickly back to back when using with Pillagers. This is just situational though. So this is the setup I used for my 120k parse, but there are definitely other variations of this that will be in a similar range. For example, if you want to run a staff on the back bar instead of dual wield, you could put Blockade of Fire there in place of Quick Cloak. Then you could either leave the rest of the setup as is, or you could drop Barbed Trap from the front bar and slot Quick Cloak there instead. This is only slightly more difficult to manage as blockade is every 15 seconds instead of every 30 seconds like quick cloak. So you will have to go to your back bar a bit more often to refresh it, which means less time spent beaming. But the AoE damage from having wall on the back bar with the Maelstrom staff is really good, and it's been a popular combo since the Arcanist released. So this setup kind of transitions us into the meta setup that Fractal and Rai used. For the skills, we have a pretty similar loadout here, except 2 additional skill slots being used for active abilities. Since they don't have Camo Hunter going, on the banner they have the Prophecy and Savagery buff and are running Heroism potions. For content, you could drop Barbed Trap if you wanted and just front bar Camo Hunter and then swap to the Heroism affix on the banner. That works too. It would be a bit cheaper and you get pretty similar results. It also help guarantee more uptime on Minor Berserk. Then they are using a staff on the back bar with Blockade of Fire and Scalding Rune for the additional dot. Fiery Contingency, which is also in the Mage's Guild line, is really good too there in place of Scalding Rune. The results are very close between the two. Scalding is a little bit more bursty though. And then finally, if you don't have Scribing, you can just replace Banner Bearer with Camo Hunter and run the setups from previous patches. Those still perform well too. Alright, now I'll cover the gear. For my 120k Parse, I'm running 1-piece Slimecraw for the monster set, 5-piece Highland Sentinel on the body, 5-piece Null Arca, which is active on the front bar, the Velothi Mage's Amulet for the mythic, and then the Black Rose Prison Daggers on the back bar. Highland Sentinel is a situational set that works on some fights where you can stand still, but for most encounters you'd swap to something like this. Deadly Strike is extremely reliable and you can use it pretty much everywhere. Coral Riptide is pretty much the strongest DPS set in the game if you can keep your stamina down for it. I also really like the Onsul plus Deadly Strike combo. This is the one that I run the most personally because it's super easy, it gets great results, and I can use it pretty much everywhere. And then if you wanted to use a staff or a bow front bar, your setup would look something like this. For the dummy Parse, I did run Charged on both of my daggers for the trait. That seems to be slightly the best for pure single target damage. Nirnhoned in Charged, however, is my favorite as an all-around setup. And Nirn Precise is also really great for AoE heavy encounters. All right, moving on to Fractal and Rai's meta setups. Very similar here, except the Maelstrom staff will be on the back bar and will be front barring Coral Riptide. All of the same alternate setups and reasonings apply with this too. Coral or Ansel plus Deadly Strike work great pretty much everywhere. And Rune Carver's Blaze is actually pretty solid as a front bar set too. J-Ro got a really nice 122k Parse with this setup here. And this was without using Heroism potions. So there's a lot of combos that work well with this configuration. And then finally, Azurblight is also still a very good option. For AoE encounters, it's still an S tier set, even after the nerfs. I do have a video covering it if you are interested in more details on that. All right, next up we'll talk about the rotation. For Fractal and Rise, I'll refer you over to their videos. You can watch them in action over there, and they also have some thorough write-ups in their descriptions. For my 120k Parse, I'll give a few tips here though. So I start off before any light attack weaving, I just cast Inspired Scholarship, and then I drop Barbed Trap. And then I start my light attack weaving with every skill after this with Fulminating Rune and then Quick Cloak. Then back to the front bar to apply the ink debuff from Flail. And then I start beaming. I'd really love to precast Quick Cloak as well, but with the Black Rose Prison set, you have to be in combat for it to activate. So if you cast Quick Cloak before you start actually attacking the enemy, before that in combat condition starts, you'll have 30 seconds without that 6% damage done increase from the Black Rose Prison set. So really important to wait until the combat condition starts. So that's why Quick Cloak is a little bit delayed there in the opening. From that point on though, you mostly just flail once after each beam, and that will get you back to 3 Crux. If you have a dot running out, you'll recast that. If not, you just start beaming again. And every once in a while, the timing will line up just right, and you won't have to flail at all to start beaming again. You'll just already be at 3 stacks, and you just hit beam right after your beam ends. Just make sure that you aren't letting your debuff from flail fall off if this happens a couple times in a row. But other than that, just try to keep up your dots. If you're going to lose a couple of seconds while you're beaming, it's usually not a big deal. I'd rather lose a couple of seconds on a dot than refresh it like 3 seconds early and push back my beam further. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I definitely made a ton of mistakes during this Parse and still got to 120k. So I know people out there that do this really well and aren't making those mistakes, can probably push this a lot higher. I didn't spend a ton of time with it. I had the idea for it and I was pretty happy with that and thought I'd go ahead and share it. So from here out, I'll just let the Parse play. Thank you so much for watching. Big thanks to those that have supported with Patreon and YouTube memberships, and a special thanks to these folks here. I really couldn't keep doing this without you. I'll see y'all in the next one. Bye.